Hello and welcome to Unacademy. I am Asmita Singh and my pronouns are she, her. Now, what I just said might sound odd to you or even oddly familiar considering social media sites and apps these days constantly want us to specify our pronouns. But what is this pronoun debate all about? What started this heated, polarizing issue? And what impact does Trump's presidency have on all of this is what the focus of today's video is going to be on. Now, most of us grew up with the idea or were taught the idea in schools that gender is simply biological. It depends on the organs that you're born with and nothing beyond that. That is very different from what children these days are growing up with, especially in countries like the United States and Canada. Children these days grow up with the knowledge that gender is something that is impermanent and something that they can choose. Now, how did this all begin? Let's start with understanding what gender actually is. Now, gender as defined by the World Health Organization refers to the characteristics of women, men, girls, and boys that are socially constructed. So now here's a point to note that gender essentially is a social construct, whereas sex, as we call it, is biological. WHO also says that this includes norms, behaviors, and roles associated with being a woman, man, girl, or boy, as well as relationships with each other. As a social construct, gender varies from society to society and can change over time. Now, the fact that it varies from society to society is because social constructs vary from society to society. Now, the kind of social constructs that we get to see in a country like India are very different from those in Europe or the United States. But an important thing to note here is that gender, even as a social construct, is hierarchical. In fact, one can argue that biological sex might not be hierarchical, but gender as a social construct is. And it has historically placed women in an inferior position in the social hierarchy. It produces inequalities that intersect with other social and economic inequalities. And this is also the reason for gender-based discrimination because of the social patriarchal gender roles that are enforced upon different men and women depending upon their geographical location as well. Right, so this is how WHO defines gender. Now, this is something that a lot of people are not used to, especially in this part of the world, because here gender is simply boy or girl, man or woman. But in the 1960s, gender activists actually made a strict demarcation between biological sex and gender. So now I hope we are clear and we know the difference between biological sex, what you're born with, and gender, which is a social construct. And now we're going to go a little bit deeper into that. What is gender binary and what is a gender continuum? Now, binary, as you can tell from the name, has two sides to it. Now, if we look at biological sex, that is binary because we have male and we have female, right? And if we were to attribute social constructs to these, we would say male is associated with masculine tendencies and behavior, and females are associated with feminine tendencies and behavior. Now, what these tendencies and behaviors are, again, depends upon the kind of society that you are from. Now, because of this gender binary, many gender activists and especially radical feminists have argued in the past that women are just always at a disadvantage. It is this gender binary that puts them in an inferior position in society, and this binary leads to gender discrimination and inequality. Now, they don't point out biological sex as the culprit here. They point out the gender roles or the societal constructs as the culprit in this binary. Okay. Now, if we go a step further, we have some queer feminists, we've had some queer feminists in the past who have argued that the only way to tackle this problem, or rather who have proposed the idea that gender shouldn't be binary and it should be on a spectrum. So is gender a spectrum. Now, what does that mean? We can imagine a spectrum, and male and female can be two ends of that spectrum, as you can see over here. Now, what queer feminists have proposed, and what a lot of people these days also believe, is that your gender can lie anywhere along this spectrum, okay? And that has nothing to do with your biological sex. So even if you are born as a female, your gender can lie somewhere over here, which is obviously leaning towards male, and the vice versa also applies. And if we were to believe that gender is a spectrum and is a continuum, then people who have gender dysphoria or who cannot identify with their biological sex, and they cannot identify with the kind of gender roles that their particular biological sex is expected to behave like or be a part of, then they can choose to not do those things, right? Now, if we were to analyze the kind of gender roles that people in India are subjected to, women are usually thought of as weak, delicate. They are expected to not have professions in a lot of places. Even in villages today, they are married off early. They don't have the right to education. So all of these are social constructs that exist because people believe that women should or shouldn't be doing certain things, and it's not something that can be biologically justified. There have been arguments to biologically justify these things, but again, that's not the entire truth. So it is believed that these are mainly social constructs. Now, these constructs are not as rigid in countries like the United States. In countries like the United States, the kind of gender roles that one is subjected to, mainly the whole alpha sigma male trend on social media, mainly aligns with the fact that men are supposed to be strong, men are supposed to provide for women, women are also supposed to take care of men, but they still have the right to pursue careers, they still have the right to education, still have more independence than what we see in third world countries, especially in rural areas, right? So now gender as a continuum has been an accepted idea, and a lot of cultural liberalism and a lot of left activism has led to this becoming an accepted idea in society. But now there is a backlash against this very idea, and why does that backlash exist is what we're going to talk about. We need to understand what the acronym LGBTQIA plus is. We know L stands for lesbian, G for gay, B for bisexual, T for transgender, Q for questioning or queer, I for intersex, A for asexual, and a lot of other identities have not found a place in the acronym. It will become a very long acronym, so we have a plus here to include all those other identities. So the focus of today's video and everything that we're going to talk about from a political perspective mainly is lies with the transgender community, but the LGBTQIA plus community in general really endorses the idea of a gender spectrum, that gender is a continuum, it's not binary. And you must have heard of some people stating their identities as non-binary, which means that they don't identify as male or female. They lie somewhere in the middle, and they can even choose. So some days they can lean towards the male side, some days towards the female side, but it's not fixed, or their gender identity is not fixed, regardless of their biological sex. Now we need to keep that in mind. This is all regardless of your biological sex, okay? So non-binary is another term that you must have seen a lot online. A lot of activists are again fighting for non-binary rights, and non-binary is what sort of started the whole pronoun debate, because if you're neither male nor female, do you use he, him as your pronouns or she, her as your pronouns? As you know, the English language does not have a gender neutral pronoun. We have they and them, but these are plural third person pronouns, right? So we don't have a gender neutral pronoun, and a lot of style guides and publications or grammarians, they are against using they them as a singular pronoun. Okay, now why has this become a political issue? This has become a political issue because non-binary people want a gender neutral pronoun for themselves. They could either use they them, or they could come up with their own, and coming up with their own can certainly lead to some sort of chaos in terms of language. And a lot of people who are against the idea of non-binary or are in general not supporters of the LGBTQIA+, refuse to refer to people by the pronouns of their choice. So they choose to just refer to people by the pronouns that belong to the biological sex, which is he, him for male and she, her for female. And this in the past has led to a lot of debates, to a lot of fights, to a lot of problems, and the debates still go on. This is the American Psychological Association explaining transgender. It says that it's an umbrella term for persons whose gender identity, gender expression or behavior does not conform to that typically associated with the sex to which they were assigned at birth. Okay? Now here are a few terms that I want to introduce you to. You might come across these terms, especially when you read about issues like this. So if you were to talk about sex assigned at birth, if there are people who are okay with the sex that was assigned to them at birth, they identify with that, they are okay with the gender identity that their biological sex gives them, we call them cisgender. Okay, and people who do not conform to the gender identity and gender expression that is associated with the sex that they were assigned at birth, we call them transgender. So you might come across terms like cis woman or trans woman. So cis woman is a woman who was assigned female at birth. That means her biological sex is female. And a trans woman is someone who've undergone, so they were assigned male at birth and they've undergone surgery or hormone therapies to now become more like a woman or become a woman. Now this is also a very contentious issue. People are debating whether trans women have the right to be called women. Okay, and we will also see the implications of that, especially in sports, in the Olympics and all of that later on in this video. Okay, so transgender is the umbrella term for people whose gender identity and gender expression does not conform to that which is associated with the gender that they were assigned at birth, the sex they were assigned at birth. Okay, now being transgender or having these gender identity issues were considered a mental and behavioral disorder, and in 2019 the World Health Organization actually dropped being transgender from their list of mental and behavioral disorders. So you can see it says here, now this is ICD is International Classification of Diseases. So here they have redefined gender identity related health, and they have replaced outdated diagnostic categories like ICD-10s, transsexualism and gender identity disorder of children, and they've just changed it to gender incongruence of adolescence and adulthood. Okay, so being transgender or having these gender identity related issues are no longer mental and behavioral disorders. They are no longer a disease, and this was changed in 2019 by the World Health Organization, right? So now many people simply identify as the other gender. They might not have the means to actually change their biology, but you must know that the medical science is advanced enough to actually help you do that. So many transgender men, and you can see this is from the National Library of Medicine, which is a US government operated library. Okay, so here they've said that many transgender men and women seek hormone therapy as part of their transition process. Now, when you want to change your biological sex so that you look feel more like the gender that you identify with, and you're also physiologically more like the gender that you identify with, then the process that you go through is called the transition process. Okay. Now here, what happens generally is that testosterone is used in transgender men, and estrogen is used for transgender women. You must understand that transgender women means somebody who's assigned male at birth, and transgender men means somebody who's assigned female at birth. Okay. And so a lot of these therapies are available. And another therapy which has been like the center of this debate includes puberty blockers. Now, why is this a problem? If you're above the age of 18 and you choose to undergo a transition process like this, that is your call, that is a choice that you make. But puberty blockers have to be administered to somebody who has not yet undergone puberty. So you're understanding the age, it would be around 11, 12, 13-year-olds, or even younger for some people. So the argument here is, if let's say a 10-year-old comes up to you and says that I cannot identify with my gender, and even though I am biologically a boy, I identify as a girl and I want to be referred to in that manner, then some parents allow their children to undergo medical procedure in which they are administered puberty blockers by doctors, obviously after multiple sessions with psychiatrists, with other kinds of specialists. And once it's established that this child definitely does want to transition and is not happy in the body that they're in, they are given puberty blockers which delay the onset of puberty. And it is important to note that a lot of these procedures are irreversible. So taking a decision like that, which has an irreversible impact on your life at the age of, let's say, 10, 11 or 12, that has been the center of this entire debate. Okay. Now let's come to the politics of it. We've understood everything that we needed to now understand what's going on in the world, specifically in America, and why Trump's second presidency is going to have a big impact on this and the entire transgender community. Okay. Now, if you were following the campaign, there were many anti-trans ads that were run by the Republicans, and one of them also claimed that Kamala is for they, them, President Trump is for you. Now I hope you clearly understand what this they, them means. It's the whole gender neutral pronoun issue. Okay, so claiming that Kamala is for they, them and President Trump is for you implies that Kamala stands with the transgender community, with the non-binary community, with the LGBTQIA plus community, and President Trump stands for you. Now, this implies that the sentiment of a lot of people in America is that whatever is happening with respect to the transgender community is wrong. And we can see, especially in the 21st century as a whole, that there's been a lot of backlash against cultural liberalism, and a lot of countries are now leaning towards the right, and they want to sort of go back to how things used to be. In America, this means going back to the good old family value system where you have a mother and a father in their traditional gender roles. Father is the provider, mother is the nurturer. So this is the kind of sentiment that a lot of people in the United States share, which is why these ads were actually quite successful. And Kamala was also accused of not properly responding to these ads by the Democrats, and she was sort of put in the spot, and they claimed that the reason why we lost the election is because you did not properly respond to these anti-trans ad campaigns. But obviously, it cannot be as simple as that. Now, let's understand the things that have happened and why these things have become an issue and how Trump is going to change that in his presidency. There's a Title IX in the Education's Amendment Act, and you can see the highlighted point over here that under Title IX, a school must treat students consistent with their gender identity, even if their education records or identification documents indicate a different sex. That means essentially that if a student comes up to you and says, do not, if it's a biological male, a boy, comes up to you and says that I no longer identify as a boy, please refer to me as a girl, my pronouns now are she, her, then the school has to comply. Everybody in the school has to comply. And a very important amendment in this was also that trans women, or we can say trans girls here to make it simpler, were allowed to participate in women's sports. What that means is that they were allowed to compete with girls who were biological females. Okay, so trans girls in schools were now allowed to compete with girls who were biological females. They were allowed to use spaces that were reserved for biological females. They were allowed to use restrooms that are reserved for biological females. And a lot of people took issue with this because they started to feel that women's spaces are not safe anymore. And they started, J.K. Rowling is a big example of this, who actively started vocalizing that we need women's spaces to be women's spaces, do not allow trans women. And they did not refer to trans women as women, they started referring to trans women as men. And they said that do not allow these men to come infiltrate women's spaces. Now, this was happening in schools as well. There were a lot of news articles where little girls lost competitions to trans girls. And there was a lot of backlash because a lot of people claimed that trans girls do have a biological advantage. It is pretty much the same as letting a man and or a boy and a girl compete with each other. The boy is going to have some sort of biological advantage and higher chances of winning. So these were the issues, and a lot of gender-affirming care was given to students in school. And California even at one point passed a law, signed a legislation where schools did not have to inform parents that their children had actually changed their gender identity in school. And there was a lot of backlash against this. This was the reason why Elon Musk also decided to move SpaceX and X headquarters out of California and move them to Texas. Another thing that started happening as a backlash to all of this is that US schools started banning a lot of books. There were a lot of parents who advocated for this, who fought for this, and over 10,000 books were actually banned amid new censorship laws. And a lot of these books, is worth noting, had LGBTQIA plus themes or characters, or were books that sort of helped LGBTQIA community become more vocal, understand their emotions and feelings and all of that. Okay, so the Obama administration was responsible for bringing about a lot of these protections for trans students and LGBTQIA plus students under Title IX of the Education Amendments Act. And the Republican government that came after Obama administration, Trump's administration, actually rolled back a lot of these. Then Biden tried to widen the protections he was giving under this amendment, and there was a lot of pushback from Republicans. And now we can see that Trump has vocally claimed and stated, this is from February last year, so it's from February 2023, where Trump there's this video of Trump that you can take a look at online. He said that he wants to end this left-wing gender insanity, that's what he called it. And he said that he wants to revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care, a process that gives students puberty blockers. And obviously Trump is going to be really harsh about it. So mutating their physical appearance and ultimately performing surgery on minor children. He also wants to sign a new executive order instructing every federal agency to cease all programs that promote the concept of sex and gender transition at any age. Ask Congress to permanently stop federal taxpayer dollars from being used to promote this. Pass a law prohibiting child sexual mutilation in all 50 states and declare that any hospital or healthcare provider that does any of this will no longer meet federal health and safety standards and will be terminated from the program. So they will essentially lose their jobs. He also said that it's a private right of action for victims, that is, children who have undergone a transition and once they've grown up want to reverse it or are no longer happy with that decision. They are being referred to as victims over here. So it's the right of these victims to sue doctors who did their surgeries, and the Department of Justice is also to investigate big pharma and big hospital networks to determine whether they have deliberately covered up horrific long-term side effects of sex transition, specifically about puberty blockers. Like, do we have enough studies that say that administering these puberty blockers to children is safe and all of that? And he also wants them to investigate whether illegally marketed hormones and puberty blockers, which are in no way licensed or approved, are being used by doctors. Right? So this is a very strict stance that he has taken against all of this, what he has referred to as left-wing gender insanity. And he says that they will also now not be providing gender-affirming care, not talk about these issues to children, which had been happening a lot in schools. And they will rather promote positive education about nuclear family, the roles of mothers and fathers, and celebrating rather than erasing things that make men and women different and unique. And he wants to ask Congress to pass a bill establishing that there are only two genders that are being recognized in the United States, that is male and female, and they are assigned at birth. So you can no longer change your gender. So if you're assigned male at birth, you remain a male for the rest of your life. It is important to note here that India, our country, actually does have a third gender, legally recognizes a third gender. Okay, now it also says that under Title 9 of the same act that we took a look at, it's prohibited for men to participate in women's sports. It's very important to know that these men that they're referring to are actually trans girls or trans women. Okay, so this, again, I want you to focus on this issue now, because this has been in the news lately. This particular issue actually blew up during the Olympics because a lot of people complained that trans women have an advantage over other women in women's sports, and so they shouldn't be allowed to participate in women's sports. Iman Khalif, who won the gold in boxing, she is an Algerian boxer. She won the gold in the women's 66 kg category. She was actually accused by a lot of prominent figures of being a man. So people said that Iman Khalif is actually a biological male, and you can see J.K. Rowling's tweet over here, or her post on X, which says, could any picture sum up our new men's right movement better? The smirk of a male, and by male she means Iman Khalif, who knows he's protected by misogynist sporting establishment, which is the International Olympics Committee, who has approved Iman Khalif and has okayed for her to be playing in this category or competing in this category. And the distress of a woman just punched in the head and whose life's ambition just shattered. Okay, so this is what J.K. Rowling tweeted. Again, this led to a lot of polarization, lots of debates. Elon Musk also agreed with this stance and reposted Riley Gaines' tweet, which said men don't belong in women's sports. He said absolutely. And Donald Trump has also vocally made it clear that he also thinks that Iman Khalif is a biological male and should have and was unjustly allowed to play or compete in that competition. In fact, Donald Trump also used this in his campaign recently, where he showed a 30-second clip of Iman Khalif playing and claimed that I think it said something along the lines of men could beat up women and win medals. But now, is all of that baseless? Is the whole debate that trans women have an advantage over biological women in sports, is that baseless? Well, there has been a UN report that says, and this was on October 23rd, 2024, that says that female athletes lost nearly 900 medals to transgender competitors. So the report, which is called Violence Against Women and Girls in Sports, actually said that transgender athletes have won around 900 medals in different women's sports at several events, replacing female athletes. So there might be some truth to this. So instead of I mean, since everyone is so polarized, I think somebody should, in a neutral fashion, try and figure out a solution for this issue. So now, what is, Trump's agenda, his manifesto, and he has some 20 core promises that he's made that you can see online on Trump's official website. So why is this transgender LGBTQIA issue such a big issue? Because out of his 20 core promises, 2 of them, 16 and 17, specifically address this. 16 says, cut federal funding for any school pushing critical race theory. Now, that's another thing that could be discussed. If you wish to discuss it, leave that in the comments. And radical gender ideology and other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content on our children. And this radical gender ideology is what we discussed today. And 17 says, keep men out of women's sports, which essentially means keep trans women out of women's sports. Now, this is the Republican stance. This is Trump's stance. And this is two of his 20 core promises to make America great again. And a lot of people in America actually share this sentiment. And we are yet to see what all is going to take place. But one thing that has already happened is that US House Speaker Mike Johnson has backed plans to ban transgender women from using female bathrooms on Capitol Hill. Okay, so it was Representative Nancy Mace who introduced this bill to enact a ban. And this happens when Sarah McBurney has taken office. She's the first ever openly transgender lawmaker. So we can see things coming into action already. What is to happen? How will it further affect the transgender community in America or worldwide? We are yet to see. In India, the implications of this would come in later, and mostly in very small tier 1 circles where Western thought and Western ideologies and social media has already penetrated, and people do resonate with Western thoughts and ideas. Otherwise, as I told you already, we do legally recognize a third gender, and how the entire transgender debate worldwide is going to impact India is kind of far-fetched, because we are still not in the space to openly accept gender ideology in the first place. We are not teaching it to students in school. But obviously in countries like the United States and Canada, this is going to have a major impact on a sizable community of their country. So that's the end of this video. Thank you so much. I hope to see you next time. Do leave your comments and feedback. Thank you so much.